Computer. All right. Hi, everybody. Claire Wasserman here. I am the founder of Ladies Get Paid. We are a book, an organization, and a global community that helps women level up financially, professionally. We're all about helping women get power in all the ways that they define it. This month, we've had a number of incredible African-American women come join us, but we're ending the month with one of my favorite women ever, Minda Harts. I've learned a lot from her over the years because we've been on panels before. I just finished your book. Give me 1 second. So, and I'm not just saying this because she's sitting in front of me, guys. This book is excellent. You need to purchase it ASAP, okay? So the memo, it's also the name of her company. Let me read her bio just super quick to you all, even though you all know it because you came to this event, and then we'll just dive right into the questions. So Minda Harts is the CEO of the Memo, which is an award-winning she's the award-winning and best-selling author also of the Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table. Minda's also a professor, guys, at NYU Wagner, and she hosts a weekly podcast called Secure the Seat. In 2020, Minda was named the #1 top voice for equity in the workplace by LinkedIn. Super, super impressive. She's also an Aspen Ideas Festival scholar and has been featured on, and I'm not going to read all the publications because there are many, and it is well deserving. So Minda, thanks for being here with us.
Thank you, Claire. I appreciate that. And I'm glad that we get a chance to see each other, even though we are social distancing.
I know, which, it's for the best, I guess. So let me just, I'm going to quickly ask you 2 questions. So, right, why did you decide to write a book? And second, I know that when you first started shopping the book around, you were getting some no's. You were getting publishers telling you that, quote, there wasn't an audience for something like this, which I think a lot of filmmakers, Black filmmakers, when they want to make movies, they're told there's not an audience for this. And then Black Panther happens. So talk to me about your process in getting this book started. And yeah, what was the feedback that you were getting in the beginning?
Yeah, well, thank you again. And thank you to everybody who's here. Appreciate you being here. So yeah, it's crazy to think that.
By the way, 1 second, people are saying Minda's volume is very low and we are unable to see her. Well, that's strange because I can see her. So maybe folks, by the way, in the chat, this is the time to take advantage of the fact that we have a chat. I always joke that it's not rude to speak while we're speaking. So put in the chat where you're calling in from, by the way, and how you're doing, drop in your LinkedIn's. This is absolutely a great opportunity to network. So looks like, all right, if y'all can hear her, see and hear, right? Daphne's there, Jessica's there. Okay, so sorry, Denisha, if that happens to be you. If you're having any trouble, guys, I would jump out of Zoom, start it again, and it'll probably be fixed. All right. Okay. Now let's do this again. Thanks, Minda.
I hope that you can see me, right?
I can see you and I can hear you, and I'm the most important person. No, just kidding. Minda's voice is fainter than Claire's, so you'll speak up.
Yeah, I'll just speak up. So hopefully you all can hear me now. Great. Okay, so I wrote the memo because there weren't any career books that talked about the experiences of women of color in the workplace. And one of my favorite authors, the late, great Toni Morrison, she said, write the book you want to read. And I was waiting for someone to write the book that I wanted to read. And I was waiting for a long time, Claire. Now, while I was waiting for a book that talked about what it's like to be a Black woman or a woman of color in the workplace, I would read other books, right? Because they had really great content and advice that I could try to modify into my situation when I was in corporate America. But I was really frustrated because I didn't feel like anyone was talking about race and gender in a way that was meaningful to me. And so being always the only one in the workplace and always feeling like an addendum, like an asterisk to everybody's status or books, I wanted to write a love letter to women of color, to Black women, and say, hey, if no one else sees you, I see you. I know your experiences matter. You're not crazy, right? And when I decided to write this book, my agent shopped it around. At that time, there were 5 major publishers. 4 of them said no, as you mentioned, because all of their tables looked the same. It was white men and women who get to make the decisions on who gets published and who doesn't. And 2 things can be true at the same time. Maybe you have never experienced that in the workplace, but it doesn't mean that somebody else hasn't, right? And I think that that is what we tend to run up against in the workplace, even when we have these experiences of inequality, because it hasn't been somebody else's experience, then we're discounted, right? No, that couldn't happen. That's just Tom being Tom, right? You know, he didn't mean any harm, but maybe he didn't mean any harm, but it did cause harm. And so, you know, so those were the things that I wanted to talk about. And even though my publisher, Hashtag Seal Press, they had similar looking tables as the other publishers, but they were able to take a look back and say, okay, intersectionality is important. Let's put this book out and see what happens. And it did become a bestseller. And, you know, even in the year of, you know, Beyonce, you know, the year of the internet, it's just one of those things where it's crazy to me when people will try to say that there's not an audience because they don't identify, because it hasn't been their experience. But, you know, now because of the success of the memo and everyone who's purchased it in some way, shape, or form or read it, thank you, because I couldn't have done it without you. And so many other Black women, women of color are getting book deals to write business books, to write career books. And so I'm so glad that money talked in this case, right? Like when you buy the book and you see that there's an audience, then it signals to the powers that be that this is important and there is an audience. And I think you're seeing that with all of the streaming platforms that are now, you know, hiring Black creatives and things of the sort.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to give a shout out right now to Leanne, who said, love Minda, bought 3 books and gave 2 to my girlfriends. Good. We love to see that. It's not just about you, but spreading the word, enormous, and leaving an Amazon review, which thousands of people have done for Minda. And I have asked her, oh my God, how did you do that? How did you get this? Because I'm taking notes from her. For sure. Now, I know with the book I read that it was really Trayvon Martin's death that showed you, quote, that there was advocacy inside me waiting to come out. I get chills. I love the way you wrote that. Talk to me. I mean, you weren't always this person, right? Somebody creating and writing the memo. So maybe like the 1 minute, how did you get here? Or talk to me about that turning point.
Yeah. I appreciate the question. And like Beyonce, she woke up that way. I didn't wake up this way. It took many years to get here. Small acts of courage, I'll say that. But really, it was Trayvon. And I realized that Black lives have to matter outside, but they also have to matter inside the workplace, right? So if we say that, oh, that's a travesty, well, what are we doing inside the workplace to make our Black employees feel like they matter too? And I really started to think about what that looked like. And at the time, Claire, I was living in Los Angeles, and there was a march happening on Wilshire Boulevard. And I was just thinking, God, what am I doing to make the workplace better, right? You know, and I'm seeing all these people advocate on the outside, but I wanted to start to think about what it could look like if I advocated for women of color, Black women inside the workplace to amplify and, you know, create space. And so it took a few years for me to figure out what that would look like, but it was creating my company in 2015, and a book and podcast and those things came after. But I really was just tired of seeing these inequalities. And I realized that it wasn't just about me, it was about creating space so that the next generation inherits a better workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. Another 2 questions that kind of go together. So we talk, and this actually really made me think when you said, I constantly feel like sort of Black women or women of color are like an addendum, can't say that, in other career books, which is why I hired a sensitivity editor for mine, because I was also sick of seeing all these books in parentheses saying, and it's worse for women of color. Like, you shouldn't be in parentheses, right? You should be centered. For you, I know you write about how, you know, corporate spaces present varying experiences for women of color than they do for white people. So could you just give an example or 2 that kind of illustrates those differences?
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the things that you talk a lot about is the wage gap, right? So that's one thing we often say women make, but we tend to say the number of what white women make, and then everybody thinks that all women make that, which is not true. You know, women of color, I think it may have changed now, but I think even after COVID-19, the increase in the wage gap is 5%. I believe. And so even now we have a larger gap than we had a year ago. And so when we talk about, you know, what women are being affected, I think it's so important that we say that, because even now you're seeing all of these headlines in the news and in articles saying women were so affected during 2020, but then when you pull the cover back, it was actually Black women
Yes.
and Latin women.
Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah.
So I think it's important that we are really clear on what women we're talking about, and so I wanted to get that intersectionality. I wanted to drive that home, and then the other part of it is the leadership gap. You know, we often see. So Lean In and McKinsey, they put out a study last year, and they said 1 in 5 white women will be promoted to the C-suite, whereas 1 in 25 women of color. And so, you know, so again, what women are we talking about? And I really thought it was important for us to talk about it. And it's not to shame any other, you know, white women or anybody else, but it's to shed a light to say, hey, even within women, we're not experiencing the workplace the same. And we need to talk about those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Something in your book, thought it was really interesting. You wrote, to thrive in the workplace as a woman of color, you need an empire state of mind, even when the environment will have you feeling like adopting an enemy state of mind, which, by the way, this book, you could have a playlist along with this book. Minda drops so many amazing lyrics and quotes and mentions of artists. It was when I was like starting to take notes on like, I need to be down, you know, if I haven't downloaded these songs, I need to be. What do you mean about that? This empire state, adopting empire state of mind, even when you might feel like adopting an enemy state of mind?
Yes, absolutely. I love music so much. If you are on Spotify, I actually have a playlist called the Memo Experience. So
Oh,
definitely download that.
that's embarrassing. Okay.
Oh no, but I don't like publicize it a lot. So just,
Okay.
you know, if you need a little extra something on this Friday, go ahead and book yourself up. But so I would say this, when I was in the workplace, it was being demonstrated to me that I necessarily didn't belong, or it was up to me to figure out how to belong, right? And so when you're in these spaces where, yes, they're talking about diversity, but you never see any diverse candidates, you look at the About Us pages and it looks the same as it did 5 years ago. You know, it's hard to believe that change is possible, and you start to get very negative, right? Maybe you get looked over again for a promotion, and you start to not question the system, but you start to question yourself. What am I doing wrong? What don't I have? You know, we start to look at ourselves as from a deficit instead of as the asset. And one of the things I started to think about, Claire, was that what part of this equation can I solve? I may not be able to solve the inequalities that are happening inside the workplace, but I can be right within. Like, I can adopt a better mindset for myself, because it's very damaging when you're in these spaces. And if you don't have a stronger sense of self, it can be very debilitating for moving forward in your career. And so I really started to think about this empire state of mind. Like, I can make it anywhere, I can do anything, and I have options, right? If this environment isn't working for me, what do I need to do to make sure I either build my own table or I find a space that celebrates me and just doesn't tolerate me? You know, and so I definitely had to take my power back in my mind, because I started to think that I was the problem. And I think that's what systemic racism would have us to believe, that we are the issue when it's not us.
How did you start to take that back for yourself? Do you remember kind of the early days of like recognizing that advocacy within you?
You know, I think I just started to get more and more frustrated. And I think the frustration started to turn into bitterness. You know, I'm like, I'm working hard as hell here. And, people are, getting promoted than me. They're telling me I'm a rising star, but they're not demonstrating it in any real way. You know, all of these different things. And for a while, for many years, I had settled into microaggressions. I settled into bias. You know, I'm like, oh, this is just how it's going to be for me as a Black woman in the workplace. And I just settled into that. I accepted it. And I remember coming across an Audre Lorde quote, and she said, "Beware of feeling you're not good enough to deserve it." And it hit me like a bag of bricks. And I was like, you know what? Just like if I were in a romantic relationship, I would be pissed right now. Okay, like I would be upset. I would not want this treatment. You know, all the things. My girlfriends would be, being like, Minda, really, what's going on? Do we need to do an intervention? So I realized that I needed to be doing an intervention for myself. But ultimately, when I lean into my courage and push aside my caution, so many other people will benefit from it. So if people don't hear me, then at least I have made my line in the sand, right? At least I centered myself instead of centering everybody else. And that's the thing, right? Like, how do we make the workplace work for everybody? And that's what I really want to convey, that the workplace is not working for everybody. So if it's been working for you and only you, what are you going to do to make sure that the rest of talent, Black and brown women, women of color, are also experiencing the workplace in the ways that would allow them not to be suffering. Because I think that's the thing. Like, I was suffering at work. Yes, I was making very good money and I could go to, Cabo with the girlfriends and we could kiki and have a great time. But when that was over, I'd go back into that oppressive system. And I realized that some of my colleagues were actually enjoying their work, and I wanted to be able to experience that too.
I'm assuming before you decided to leave, you tried to make it better, right? You're getting frustrated, but you try to affect change from the inside as best you can. And then obviously at some point you go, I'm going to start my own organization. What did you do when you were still working there to speak up, rise up, push back? And I know that there's always danger in that for any woman, but particularly for Black women. Do you have any examples of a time when you said, listen, I'm going to check you on this, or I'm going to try to make change here before I leave?
Yeah, to be honest, I never wanted to build my own table. That was never the plan.
Too tired. This is horrible. It's terrible to run your own company. It's very exhausting.
That was never the goal.
Right.
I think most Black women end up starting their own companies because they feel like they have to. Like,
Yeah.
there's no other options. Where it's forced entrepreneurship, and that's not how entrepreneurship should necessarily be, in my opinion. So for me, it was, I realized, Claire, that I couldn't do it by myself. And that was the issue, right? Like, I can't change an environment that doesn't want to change. People are comfortable in their discomfort. They're comfortable in the toxicity. And so I realized that, okay, I can keep banging my head against the wall for people to treat me with humanity and dignity, which should be table stakes, or I can finally get out of this abusive relationship. And I couldn't leave it right away, but I strategized on how to get out of there, but make sure that I, again, centered myself. So it started where maybe I wasn't talking, like if somebody said something inappropriate to me, then I would oftentimes not say anything, but then I started to give myself permission to speak up when I needed to, right? So I would then go to my manager and say, hey, these things are happening in the meeting. I just want to make you, you're in these meetings, so you're aware of it, but I want you to know how it's affecting me. I really need your support in these ways. So I started to try to build relationships with other people that I felt might be able to show up for me, might be able to make it less painful in these situations. But even those people were not courageous enough to do anything. They were the people who wanted to pat me on the back and say, yeah, this is horrible, but I can't do anything about it. Or they didn't feel like they could either. And so eventually I just had to leave, unfortunately. But I mourn my career, Claire. I mourn it because I was good at my job, but I knew that my mental health was on the verge of insanity. And so I really had to center myself and make a decision that would allow me to heal. And I was dealing with so much racial trauma that I didn't even know myself or recognize myself anymore because it had affected me in such a horrible way. And so I realized I would be more effective stepping away for a little while.
Constance, right? Sheeple. I guess, yeah, sheep, people, sheep. Okay. I'm not sure if that's what you meant, but that's what I'm getting from it. It's something that you talk about in the book, and I talk about it in mine as well, is just the importance of allies, right? So it's like, well, we all need to have advocates and allies regardless, but especially if you are looking to speak up about something, you should not be the lone voice, again, and whatever that speaking up means. So you need to kind of circle your wagons. And you mentioned in the book, you had this wise mentor say, you need to make the rounds. A, what did that mean? And B, how do we do that virtually?
Yeah, so I love that you asked that question, because oftentimes I get a lot of messages, and I'm sure you do too, from women who'll say, how do you build your social capital in a virtual environment? And really, I think we have a really unique opportunity right now to make those rounds, but they look a little bit differently, right? So showing our face on camera when we can, right? So people can see us, they see our name, using the chat. If someone's talking about something in a meeting, maybe you don't feel comfortable using your voice in that way, but make sure you're chiming in the chat, right? We're all here together. Let's say if we were in a business call and you see, oh, there's 70, plus or whatever participants saying, hey, I saw you at last week's meeting, blah, 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 would love to grab a virtual coffee with you,
Yeah.
right? So you're at the same event that I'm at. So this is a way that we can build relationships with people. And 9 times out of 10, I feel like our managers and those in senior positions are going to say yes, because we were invisible to many people when we were in the office. We might not have been in meetings that they were. And now we have the opportunity to be in spaces and be visible and make ourselves visible. So don't discount that opportunity. But when I was in a traditional workplace, I worked on the floor with the most senior man in our company. And I realized that, Claire, if I was waiting on him to come talk to me and ask me what my favorite shows were, I'd be sitting in that cube today waiting on him to
I know.
Okay. So long story short, I realized that I needed a squad. I needed people inside the workplace who were invested in my success, but also I could be invested in theirs. And that success is not a solo sport. Like, I can't build my career by myself, and I can't fix inequality by myself. So if I could, one at a time, connect with people who get to know me, I get to know them. We seem like we have some similar values and work ethic, and go from there, right? You don't know until you put yourself out there. And I'm so glad that I would take those small acts of courage to talk with him when I would see him in the elevator, when he'd say, "Hi, Minda, how you doing?" I wouldn't just say, "Oh, I'm doing good," and keep looking at the elevator doors. I would articulate my value, quantify my work. I would tell him, "Oh, I'm working on these really great projects," in a very authentic way. And the final thing I'll say is, I didn't know where that relationship would lead. I didn't ask him to be my sponsor. I didn't ask him to be my ally. I just built a relationship with him like I would build it with anybody else. And eventually, that relationship actually turned into a sponsorship, because he was in one of his senior staff meetings and the CEO got sick and she couldn't go to a big client meeting that was in San Francisco. And she asked her senior staff, who can go in my place? And everybody already was traveling somewhere else, so they couldn't go. And she's like, "Well, maybe we just need to cancel this." And my guy, Chuck, he says, "Minda, she's actually in San Francisco. Why don't we let her take it?" And everybody in the room was like, "We don't know her. She's too junior, blah, blah, blah. We'd rather, cancel the meeting." He's like, "No, this is too big. Why don't you let's give her a chance. If it doesn't work out, it's on me," right? I get this call, Claire, out of the blue, right? And he says, "Kid, you're up. Here's what you got to do." And I went, and I had prepared myself for any moment, right? It wasn't, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. So I'd been waiting for that moment in time. I just didn't know when it was coming. And I went, I slayed that meeting. And 3 months later, I was promoted. And now I was the first Black woman in that room.
Wow.
And it was him using his privilege, right? It didn't take anything away from him. He still had his position. And now I think I always think about that moment. I mean, he changed my career exponentially, and I'm forever grateful for it. But I also thank myself, because I put myself out there. I build relationships, and we have to do that sometimes.
Yeah. That story to a T is the definition of sponsorship. It's developing relationships with people who are in rooms that you do not have access to, who wield their influence to vouch for you. I mean, it's kind of wild. Like, you and I, we do research, we know this space, and then there's somebody's life. I mean, you're like, and they're like, this is literally exactly the steps to follow to get to this moment. I'm assuming, are you still in touch?
I am. We're still in touch. Of course, he's so surprised he's not surprised where I'm at now, but he's like so surprised, because it took me a long time to even activate my voice in those ways. So for him to see where I began. But the one thing I want to chime in on too, Claire, is that we all have the ability to speak each other's names in the rooms that we're not in.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a senior person to do that. And I think as women of color, we could do more of that for each other. And so I hope that everyone consider speaking someone's name in a room that they're not in.
Yeah. And even to somebody's manager, just like quickly, "Hey," even on Slack, just want to let you know, Minda's doing a great job, or you look good to do that. And also with Chuck, it reflected well on him. Yeah, he put his neck out there, but he knew you were going to deliver, and you did. And that now reflects positively on him just as much as it does for you. I love that. You write in the book, as women of color, we often feel like we have to hide our ambition. It kind of seems with Chuck, you were vocal about the work that you were doing. Was there a time, first of all, why do you feel like women of color have to hide their ambition? Did you feel that way? And then how did you kind of move past it, or at least deal with it?
Yeah, I feel like we have to shrink ourselves, right? Because I think some people, the narrative that other people would place on women of color, Black women, is that we're being too aggressive. We're not waiting our turn. All of these sorts of stereotypes that if another person were to do it, they're taking initiative. They're doing all the things. But with us, we have to be ever so careful about how we're coming off, right? And so I think that goes back to the Empire State of Mind. If we're constantly walking on eggshells in the workplace, wondering if we can say this, if we can do that, it's mental gymnastics that a lot of people don't have to experience, and we never know. Like, we could do all the things right, check the list and check it twice, and still somebody may view us as being to something that is not comfortable for them. And so I do think that, again, oftentimes I think the dominant majority, they may say, oh, I see myself in Chris. He reminds me of when I was young, right? He's a go-getter, but they don't see that same go-getterness inside of us always, and so they don't see it the same way. And so I do think that there are these biases that take place in the workplace. And so I think our ambition is sometimes smothered because we just don't have access to some of the same opportunities as our colleagues.
Nicole, mental gymnastics, indeed. We win gold medals in that sport every day. God.
Every time.
Jesus. By the way, guys, put in your questions. Like, I have a bunch of questions that I prepared, but I'm just one person and you're here. We want to deliver what you're looking for. So put them in the chat. Andrea, she said, what's your favorite way to take up space in a positive way?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, sorry, the sun's coming in on like this really weird way. So I'm trying to like move the way.
Yeah, I was like, it kind of looks cool. It looks like you have like a streak in your hair.
So I think the way that I've become more comfortable taking up space is actually doing what I'm doing now, right? Using the books, using the podcasts, speaking out at the companies that invite me in to talk about these issues, and being honest, right? Because the reality is many of us who are inside of these companies right now don't feel that psychological safety to speak up and say what's real, right? Because there's that fear of backlash. And so for me, I take it, if I'm invited in, I'm going to say the things that need to be said, because it may be the only chance that our counterparts will hear it. And hopefully that would open up a larger dialogue. And so the one thing that helps me too is, many of you can see there's a picture behind me of Shirley Chisholm. And I think about all the women that came before me, especially my Black women heroes and sheroes. And I think about their courage, and I'm a direct beneficiary of their courage. Had they not activated their voices, had they not taken up space, I wouldn't be able to take up space the way I am today. And so I think about the generation that's coming behind me. Am I leaving them something that they can hold on to, right? That they can have extended space to take up to. So even when I'm nervous, even when I'm scared, I think about who's going to benefit from me being courageous. Nobody benefits when I'm cautious.
By the way, in Minda's book, she has a list of women who, and I think they're all living, but women of color who are doing amazing things that we should be aware of. And actually, you mentioned Anjali Sood, who's the CEO of Vimeo. I know we had her on. We did a fireside with her. So this is really great. When people are like, I can't find any. First of all, fuck you guys. You're not looking hard enough. But start page 171 in this book. Minda will tell you. You can find amazing women of color. Great question here from Iris Ann. She said, how did you learn to set boundaries without coming across as aggressive? And I would say both boundaries, but also maybe speaking up for what you want without coming across as aggressive, because we know that that's a real possibility that could happen.
Yeah, it's crazy because I think that we will drive ourselves crazy trying to figure out how somebody's going to view us. Since it's Black History Month, I want to mention W.E.B. Du Bois. He talks about double consciousness, and double consciousness is seeing yourself through the eyes of somebody else. And I think that we are constantly seeing ourselves through the way that white people see us, which is not allowing ourselves to see us and be who we need to be inside the workplace for ourselves. And so half of that, I think, is building relationships with people like Chuck or whomever, who, when somebody says, oh, Minda's being aggressive, that hopefully someone that you've made a connection with in the workplace will say, actually, that hasn't been my experience with Minda, She hasn't been aggressive. And I also started to have conversations with my colleagues because they'd always come to me after the fact when something bad has taken place in the meeting, and then they didn't say anything. They're like, oh, what could I do? And I'm like, well, when that's happening, you could actually support me in these ways. So, and I give them what they could be doing to support me in these ways. Now, I didn't learn to do that till very, very end of my career, but I wish that I would have told people what I needed from them, right? Because I didn't think I could. And I think that helped diffuse some of that bias that people might have been projecting. But the other thing I had to start to realize is, if I'm being authentic to myself, if I'm being professional based off of how I define professionalism, then how that person receives what I'm saying is on them, right? If they're not a good communicator, then they're always going to think I'm being aggressive or any other adjective that you can think about it. When I teach at NYU, there's one book that I use in my syllabus called Difficult Conversations. And I find that I make sure all my students read it as best as I can. And because I find that most of our adults don't know how to effectively communicate. And because when you bring something to somebody, they automatically have this defense mechanism, right? Like they shut down, they shut off, they're not hearing you anymore. And so I think that, and I would encourage everyone to pick up the book if you can, Difficult Conversations. It has like 3 authors. You can find it anywhere, but it actually helps you have these conversations with people who have difficult personalities, right? But also it makes sure that you're still standing your ground. And I do think it takes a little finesse and it takes some practice. And even when you've done everything right, some of those people are always going to see us that way. There's no way we can change their mind. So I often say, focus on who is supporting you versus who isn't, right? And maybe someone else needs to have that conversation because you're always going to be met with that type of backlash. And I just think we can be a little more strategic around how we're advancing our agendas. And sometimes we need other people to help do that.
There's 2 great questions that were just asked. I'm going to get to them in just 1 minute, but you mentioned kind of seeing yourself through how sort of the white lens or the white male lens. Your name, and you mentioned, it's interesting, you said my government name is Yasminda. Okay. And then you changed it. Well, did you change it legally? And then also, why did you say my government name and not my real name? Or is that kind of interchangeable? I thought it was interesting that, because I would have thought my real name, but then it seemed like maybe you made a deliberate choice to say my government name instead.
I did. So on my birth certificate, my name is Yasminda. And so that is a government issued document. And sometimes in the Black community, we poke a little fun and we'll say our government name. So I used it in that sense. But my name on my checks that clear is Minda Harts. So I'm still using it. But it's one of those things where I made that decision in the workplace, in school, because I was always met with people having a hard time pronouncing it, not even trying to pronounce it. And then when I went to try to get my first job, but before then I knew that people were afraid of that Y and all those S's and all those things. So I'm like, you know what? I need an opportunity to get a good job, and I'm going to make this easy on them. And I think when we show up in this world, even as young adults and as we get older, we're always trying to make the dominant majority feel comfortable with us. And it's an unfortunate thing, and I really have had to unlearn, and that has taken a lot of therapy to where I'm not censoring every experience around white men and women.
Is there anything else in that kind of therapy work that you've done? Which, by the way, I always kind of joke, when you buy Ladies Get Paid the book, you should also get a therapist. I'm imagining, kind of the same here. In your internal work, was there anything that an aha moment of, wow, I've really been centering my thinking or the way that I act or communicate through this lens, and maybe something you didn't even realize you were doing? The name, yes, that for sure. Anything else come up for you?
I would definitely say, well, I think when it started to get triggering for me is when people started to say, bring your authentic self to work. And
Okay.
I'm like, wait a second, you don't want me to bring my authentic self to work. You want me to bring the version of myself that you're comfortable with, the version of myself that you want to see my hair the way you want to see it, those sorts of things. And I'm like, you know what? Black women don't get a chance to bring their authentic selves to work. Some of us will never have that opportunity, right? And because we know the workplaces we work in, right? And we understand that. And so I think that for me, really censoring every experience, how will my white colleagues accept if I wear this to work or not? And I remember even being on vacation at one point, and it was Sunday night, Claire, and I had braids in my hair, and I had gone to the beach or wherever. And I knew I stayed up all night taking those braids out before Monday getting my hair blown out, because I knew that would be a huge topic of conversation. And I didn't want to have it, you know what I'm saying? And I didn't want, and it's painful, right? Because I have to think about how my colleagues will see me, because they will say things, they've said it before. So I already know that when I come with braids in the office, it's going to be, breaking news. So I'm just don't want to deal with it. And so those are the things that we do. So when people say bring your authentic selves to work, let's be honest about what we're talking about and who gets a chance to bring that. And that became triggering for me. And I'm like, I don't even know who that is anymore, because for 15 years, I've been showing up the way that I think you want me to, right? That you like this version of Minda. So I can't switch it up, because that might mess around with my money, and I don't want that to happen, but at the expense of my own well-being. And that's when I really started to investigate and interrogate how it's mentally affected me over the years, not being able to show up and be my best self.
Yeah. And we got a lot of people saying, people don't want that truth. So true. Absolutely. Truth. Too true. Yeah. Thank you. And again, this is why chat online, it's just so important that people realize they're not alone in this stuff. The two questions that people asked here: what advice do you have for women trying to work around managers that are at best unsupportive, at worst adversary of their efforts at upward advancement? In my case, I've started a dialogue with HR, but my concern is the impact it will have on how my team members will perceive me. Potential angry Black woman trope. That's a lot to unpack there, but any initial thoughts?
Yeah, that's a lot. First of all, I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. So when I wrote the memo, when I was interviewing women of color, 70% of them said that they felt like their managers were not invested in their success. That's a very high number. And so whenever I am consulting or talking with companies, I said, where we need to start? Management, because not everybody knows how to manage. And that's the promotion, right? You get promoted into managing people. And some managers have no business being people managers. They should be individual contributors. And because many managers don't know how to manage, first of all, anyone, but then people of color or anybody who feels marginalized, then it creates issues. And that's a direct reflection of who gets advanced and who gets promoted, right? So if your manager isn't invested, it's an issue. So the one thing that I'll say is think about what you want out of your career. In the memo, I talk about your career hierarchy of needs. And if you've come to your manager, you went to HR, and you feel like you're still not being supported, it's not psychologically safe for you to be there, then start to think about, what are my other options? If I like the company I work for, maybe I can get on another team, right? And get a different manager. I would have those conversations with myself and then figure out what I want out of it. And if you feel like you're never going to get what you need at this particular place you're working at, strategize, set your goals so that you find a new place, right? Because again, back to workplaces feeling like relationships, sometimes we know when we're being mistreated. Sometimes we question it because we're in that toxic relationship, and we're like, well, maybe they'll do better next time, and it's the same thing. So at some point we have to say, okay, I can't be in this space anymore, and I'm not going to get what I want. And if my colleagues think that their go-to button is I'm being angry just because I want some humanity, I want some empathy, then that's something that you can't tackle by yourself. But I'm glad that you're having the conversations, because the other statistic is, I don't know the exact percentage, but in one article it said that I can't remember exactly, but it's around 80% of Black women end up leaving their employers without actually having had a conversation with anybody. And I think and maybe we know what the outcomes will be, but I would encourage us to have those conversations, because it's better to have them and know than leave and not know, right? Because maybe somebody could have done something for us. But I think sometimes we're just too tired and we're at our wits' end and we don't have those conversations. But I think it might benefit us if we do, especially in this climate. I think we would find that people don't want a lawsuit on their hands, so they may want to have the conversations that you want to have.
Yeah. And also it'll help have a record there, that person, so that's if you do go to HR. What's corporate America doing well, if anything, to, not just have inclusivity, but like real support. Yes, people can feel welcome, but like, is that necessarily helping them get upward momentum? There probably needs to be more than just, one career development webinar. So what are people doing well? And then what can they do better?
I'm actually really optimistic about the future because I'm old enough to remember when we weren't talking about race in the workplace, which was not too long ago, right? So we weren't having some of the conversations that we're having now. Before, we would be met with, don't play the race card. And now companies can't get enough talking about race in the workplace. And so I do think that we've shifted. The next part of it is holding them accountable. So if your company did say that X, Y, and Z was important last year, then let's make sure that we're holding them accountable to make sure that they're good on their promises, because we can't solve these problems, like Claire said, in a webinar in 90 minutes or a couple of sessions. This is an everyday practice. Equity happens every day. So I feel, again, it's like the small acts, the everyday acts that need to be happening within our companies. And it starts with people, because people are what harm people inside the workplace. And so let's normalize, if we have some of those toxic personalities, that they don't get to stay, that women of color or people of color get to stay, right? They don't have to leave because of bad character. So I do think what they're doing right is, for those who are talking about it and at least having some type of training or training development, any of those things, conscious, unconscious bias training. I know that that's low hanging fruit, but at least that's better than it was last year. And then from there, we want to see some, it's not a pipeline issue. The issue is the intentionality. So let's not focus, yes, more hiring from HBCUs. That's important, but it's yes and. What about the employees that are in your company right now? Don't forget about those women of color that are in the middle of their careers or need to be advanced. So I think what we need to see, what can be doing better, is moving folks up the pipeline into middle management and senior level positions.
Yes. Yeah. Yasmin says, how do you navigate? This is like, I'm really sorry for Yasmin's experience here. So she said, how do you navigate performative allyship? I worked for an organization founded by women that claims to champion other women. White feminism was centered, and the leaders were extremely comfortable with appropriating the work of women of color while chronically underpaying us. So there's a lot of issues to unpack there. So maybe let's start with that first one, navigating performative allyship.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
It's I'm sorry that you've experienced that, but I think that's very prevalent in a lot of spaces, especially nonprofit spaces. But I think that this is, again, where the accountability comes in, and having those courageous conversations and hoping that our leaders are met with courageous listening, because it takes courage to actually come to someone and say, hey, I'm experiencing this, or this is going on. I think it might be helpful. I think the best analogy that I could use, if I have any insecure people who are big on Insecure or Issa Rae, but there's one episode where I think it's in season 3 or at the end of season 2, and there's all these issues with the name Issa's former workplace, We Got Y'all. And Issa tried to tell the white woman executive director that, there's some issues with this, and she did not want to hear it. And then in the larger meeting, some of the other colleagues said that maybe this name is racist. Maybe we only have one person of color that works here, yet we're serving all of these students of color. That's an issue. And their manager did not want to hear it. In her mind, she's helping, and I think that the only part of the equation we can solve is telling them. And then if they don't hear it, then that's on them. And then we have to decide what's best for us. But again, this isn't a racial issue to me. This is a humanity issue. And so if people want to do better, you'll see them doing the work, doing the hard work. And you'll know it's performative when you don't see any change. And in that case, again, you have to figure out what's best for you. And if this is a space in which you can thrive or just survive, because some of these people who say they want it, they'll never change, right? And those are the places that we don't need to work at.
And I think if you can offer solutions, by solutions, I don't mean saying, I'll start the Black Women ERG, right? Though that being said, I do encourage people to begin these things. You know why? You'll make work life better. You need to use it as part of your annual review. Go get a raise because of the work that you've done to contribute to the company, which, by the way, keeps people working, which is It saves money, retention and acquisition. This saves money for the company. And this can absolutely be part of the work you do moving forward, and you look like a leader. So what I'm saying is when you come with suggestions of how they can remedy a problem, that doesn't mean now martyring yourself. Okay. So there's a balance there. I do want to just call out, or not call out, but Carol said, how do you approach promotion topics with management without sounding like you're bragging? You're not bragging because you're talking about how you've served the company. Okay. And your manager will be thrilled because their success hinges on your success. So I'm going to just put that. We got to put the bragging to bed. I want to talk actually just a little bit about more towards like the beginning of your career, Minda. And you talked about in the book, creating a purpose statement, which I love, because when people get too granular, like the 5-year plan, it A, puts a lot of pressure on you, and B, might close you off to opportunities. That being said, it is good to anchor yourself somewhere. And you said that with purpose. How did you create? I mean, I know in the book you help people create their purpose statement, but could you talk to me a little bit about your own experience doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, and if you haven't gotten Claire's book, Ladies Get Paid, please go ahead and get that, because that will also help you on your career development. I think the Memo and Ladies Get Paid go really well together. So definitely, and a therapist, like Claire said. But what I do think is important is understanding our why. I think oftentimes as women, we've been told what we should be doing. There's an expectation of what our careers should look like, at certain ages of our life. Even we put this self-imposed pressure on what we should be doing by the time we're 30 or 40 or whatever. And oftentimes we're not doing the best work of our careers, meaning, yes, we might be working for the company that we want to. Maybe we're working on projects that might bring us joy, but what if we could be doing the best work of our career, doing something else, or allowing ourselves to really bring the authentic pieces of ourselves that we want to work. And so I started to think about, I say I wanted back then to have a seat at the table, but why did I want to have a seat at the table, right? Did I just want to have it because I wanted to be in the room? Did I want to have it because I wanted to affect change in that room? Did I want to bring other women that look like me along with me? And so when you're thinking about your next steps, think about why you want to do that. And in the book, I talk about having a career hierarchy of needs. And then I started to get even more clear. Okay, well, I've worked enough to know that if I take on another job, here's the type of manager I need, right? Like, I'm going to get very clear on what it is I need. I know that I do the best work when I have a manager who is invested in my success, but you may not know that when you're interviewing. But the other thing is, I would ask those questions based off of, I need a manager that gives me feedback. I can't work with a manager that never gives me any feedback on my work. So I'm going to ask in the interview process or in my one-on-ones questions that get to the heart of that. And so once I was able to figure out what my wants are, I also then drilled down into what I'm good at, right? Just because I'm doing Excel spreadsheets doesn't mean I'm good at them, right?
We talk about that. I'm terrible also. You were like, one of my regrets was not learning how to like master Excel. I am exactly the same one. Like, and it's like, I watch Ashley doing like these formulas. It looks so cool. And then I've just accepted, okay, that's not my strength. And I moved on. But that made me laugh when I read it in your book.
Yeah, I would be a really badass woman if I knew how to do a pivot table. I mean, that may be in my next life.
I don't even know what that is. I don't even know what that is.
It sounds cool though, right? When I see it, I'm very impressed. So I had to get really clear. And so at the end of it, I realized what I really wanted to do was to catalyze equity for women of color in the workplace. I may not have known at the time what that meant, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. And then I started to build a map that would help me to do that. And I'm able to do that today. And so get really clear on what you want. Career paths aren't always linear. Sometimes we have to take some detours to get to where we want to be. But you have some options, you have choices. Don't be afraid to find out what you really want out of your career.
And by the way, guys, we have a little less than 10 minutes if you want to throw in some last minute questions. Something I found really interesting in your career was that you left your job, but then came back at some point, right? Can you go into a little bit more detail, your choice to move on, and then how did they get you back? And if you use that as leverage in any way, both for the work you were doing and maybe for in your negotiation?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I left my job, I was at one place for 10 years. And
Wow.
then I found that what I wanted I wasn't going to get it anytime soon there. Had this offer to give me the title that I wanted, more money. I would have liked it from the place that I had just spent 10 years of my career at, but it wasn't happening. So I took a risk, and I took the chance of going to this new environment. And then when I left, just like a relationship, right? You realize sometimes maybe I really did want her, I really did want to be with her. And so they would keep coming back in the year that I was gone from them. They would keep checking in with me, seeing what's going on. If one of my former colleagues was in the state that I was living in, they'd want to do coffee. They were still keeping things warm because they now realize, without me being there, how much I added to the bottom line. And so when they finally asked me, hey, would you consider coming back? I said, oh, you know what, I consider it, but I need this now. And and I leveraged what I was making, and I asked for more than that. And then I leveraged, I want to work from home. I don't want to move back to LA, so, those sorts of things. So I felt empowered, right? I'm like, if they want me to come back, then this is what I need. And I was really happy with that. I mean, eventually I needed to leave that space as well. But I think that for me, I came to the point in my career, Claire, where I realized I was the asset.
Yeah.
You move differently when you realize you're the asset. So, yeah. I pray that we all feel that way at some point in our life.
I'm assuming when you were there, I mean, 10 years, that you have proven yourself. I'm assuming that you had asked for what you wanted and they just said no, and that's why you left, and then something changed? Or did you not feel like you really kind of advocated for yourself as strongly as you could have?
You know what? I think that I didn't advocate for myself in the way that I probably could have. I think it was, so I'll say this. At the time that I was negotiating with my 10-year company, I had a new manager. So I didn't have that same support that I had in my previous manager. So that manager wasn't going to bat for me like my previous one was. And I think that, if I had to go over and do it again, I would have not had all my eggs in one basket, because when my Chuck left, a lot of other things left too, right? So I should have been building relationships with other people to make sure that I still had the access that I needed. And so when I end up, they told me they could only give me half of what I was asking for. And then in 6 months, maybe they would give me another half. And I'm like, if you're able to give me 6 months now, why can't you do it all right now? And they're like, well, protocol. I was like, okay, cool. And so I betted on myself, and I realized, I don't have to wait a year to get what I want. I can go get this somewhere else. And so I had no plans on coming back. I left them in the rearview mirror. But then once they came back, and I was in a horrible situation that I had, sometimes the grass isn't greener on the other side. I was in a situation, now they didn't know this, but it worked in my behalf. And I'm glad that they felt the loss of not having me there. And so at that point, they were able to do all of these things for me that they could have done back then, but they didn't, right? And I think that's the aha moment, is now you're able to give me triple for what I asked for, but before you weren't willing to do that. And so I think it's that part, right? They thought that I was always going to be there, so they didn't value me in the same ways that they might have valued other people. I was just that loyal employee that they could always count on, so they didn't think they had to do all that for me.
Right. And I think there's statistics that show that women get promotions and raises more often when they leave a company than within a company. And if you can leverage it to come back, but that's because you also developed relationships and you kept in touch, and right. So there was still sort of goodwill there.
And I left good, I left on good terms, so I could go back. But it was good because it really pushed me more into the next phase of my advocacy. So, not all is lost, even in some of our most painful moments in the workplace.
Did you wish that you'd left earlier? I only ask because sometimes people stay too long. There's such thing as like staying too long in a company.
Yes. I believe in expiration dates, and a lot of in life period. Like we're in situations sometimes where we know it's time to go, but because we're afraid, right? Because we have responsibilities, all the things, that we stay a little bit longer. And I did stay longer than I should have. When I went back there, I stayed a couple more years, but it's still when I had a more of an awakening and understanding what my worth was, the things that I didn't noticed before, noticed them. I was acutely aware of the racism going back into it, right? Before it was very subtle. Now I felt it in a different way. So I physically couldn't stay in that space much longer, knowing what I need to be successful. And back to the Audre Lorde quote, beware of feeling you're not good enough to deserve it. I deserve a space that celebrates me and doesn't tolerate me.
Yes, getting some applause. Ordering your book now. So many gems. This is so affirming. Yes, we love helping women and we love selling books. Last thing, I love this line in the book. You said, we are no longer just sitting at the table, which is interesting because this is about, securing a seat at the table. But you said, we are no longer just sitting at the table. We are ready to shake up the entire room. This is not about tables and chairs. Our goal is much bigger. Securing our seat is about legacy building. I know we only have 2 minutes left, but take us out with that. Expand a little bit on that, please.
Yes. I think our former First Lady, Michelle Obama, said it best. We are just so grateful to be at the table that we're scared to shake it up. And our goal is to shake up the room. We weren't there before. This is our chance, right? Being grateful is not on the job description. You're there because...
Oh, I'm sorry. That is so good. Being grateful is not on the job description. Somebody tweet that. That's excellent.
It's not. And once we as women realize that, we can show up differently, right? So I'm here just like everybody else is in the room. So I'm giving myself space to say what needs to be said, add value to the room, build relationships with others so that they can also chime in on my ideas, but then bring others to that room, that we don't get that seat just for us. This is about legacy building. It's about succession planning. When we leave that table, who's coming behind us, right? So that's what I'm talking about. It's not enough just to get in there and kick our feet up and be like, guess I'm in here. No, it's what you do when you sit down that really counts.
Amazing. And everybody here, tell us how we can support you, find you, follow you, purchase the book, all that good stuff.
Well, I just want to thank you, Claire and Ashley, for always being supportive of my work, and it means so much to me. So thank you. Thank you for how you show up for women each and every day, and I'm appreciative of you both. Thank you to everybody who came today, who purchased it. Go to mindaharts.com. I'm most active on Twitter at Minda Harts, but you can also follow me on LinkedIn. And my next book, Right Within, is on pre-order right now, and it comes out October 5th. So excited to...
Oh my God, another book?
Another book.
We may have discussed this, but I'm still so traumatized from writing my own book. This stuff is hard. It is hard. I am so proud, honored. It is fun to be in touch over, a period of time, because then we can, our careers have, and more people that we've helped. And I hope that you are getting paid more money than ever before by these companies. You are getting hired more than ever before. That is, I guess, a positive thing to come out of this summer. If people, if they're only doing this to save their asses from a lawsuit or good PR, so be it, because you're being welcomed into those companies to make change. Thank you all very much for being here. The recording is going to go up soon on YouTube. We will send it out along with some of those links to follow. Of course, check out ladiesgetpaid.com/book. You'll find the book there. You'll also see a place where you can join Ladies Get Paid, which means adding you to Slack. It's free. 75,000 women on Slack. 120 countries, 2 million messages exchanged since 2016. It is a great place to find jobs and to support each other. Happy Friday, happy weekend. I love doing stuff at the end of the week. It makes I'm not working after this. So you were the end of my day, and I'm on the West Coast. So that is an early day for me. Wonderful way to end it. Thank you all. Thank you, Minda, and stay well.
All right, take care, everybody.